The best ball playoffs are getting close. So we're back here at Spike Week, Monday Night Best Ball, breaking everything down. What's happened up until this point, coping with all of our injuries, praying for our live teams, and figuring out what we might need to win some of these best ball tournaments with just 1 week left in the regular season. Myself, Eric Beinfort, and Rob Coakley. We're going to dive in right now with you on Monday Night Best Ball.
3, 2, 1, liftoff.
All right, Rob, it's been a minute. I'm excited.
I was
to be
going to
back.
introduce myself to you.
Yeah, hello.
My name's Rob.
Stranger friend.
Yes.
Rob Coakley. I just know him as King Coakley via the interwebs. But I am excited to be back, and thank you guys for joining us. It's all a little mini hiatus. Look, I understand plenty of people are out there doing content every single day, but we took a small little mini break during the course of the season. I do lots of DFS content and sports betting content and the radio and all sorts of fun stuff. And so I sort of let Rob kind of run the show there for a few weeks. And we are back because the playoffs are about to be here. The fantasy playoffs, the best ball playoffs. If you play on FFPC, I guess you've kind of already been a little bit in the playoffs, but where it really counts for us in all of our best ball tournaments, it's about here. There's one more week. We got one more week to pray that some of our teams that are outside of advancing somehow sneak their way up into it. Although, Rob, what I want to start with is the typical cliche that everyone says, oh my gosh, this year it feels like the injuries are so much worse than every single other year. But what I will say is, it does feel that way. So I am a walking cliche. I am that cliche. But I also think this year in particular, it has just felt like we can't get out of a single week without someone going down to a long-term or season-ending injury. And it always seems to be very, very like impactful players, and not just impactful players like, you know, that individual player, Mike Williams, right, goes down early in the year. But like a lot of these guys have like this cascading effect to the whole best ball kind of experience where, you know, so all the way from like Aaron Rodgers and J.K. Dobbins in week 1, Aaron Rodgers in particular, people that drafted him are not feeling very good, right, when he goes down. But then you have people who drafted Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall based on the fact that Aaron Rodgers would be there. The whole reason why you drafted them was that they would be here, right? Then Joe Burrow goes down. The whole reason why you draft Jamar Chase is not just Jamar Chase, but you didn't draft Jamar Chase would not be the 102 if Jake Browning was the quarterback, right? And we knew that Jake Browning was the quarterback. There's been so many of these injuries like that, of course, to quarterbacks. I know there's the stat going around that this year, like just 2 fewer quarterbacks or something like that have played. But it's the quarterback play is so bad across the league now that it feels to me like quarterback play is so bad. We're having so many injuries to running backs, wide receivers, tight ends. But then even the guys that are left standing, right? Like, do you feel good about having Garrett Wilson? Do you feel good about having Saquon Barkley? Do you feel good about having, you know, a lot of these guys that have also been impacted, right? Joe Mixon was struggling to get there with Joe Burrow. Is Joe Mixon going to be the guy with Jake Browning? And as this team continues to lose, there's just so much to kind of start to take in that I'm sure everybody feels like this, but I certainly do. As I scroll through my teams, even the ones that are advancing or scoring a bunch of points, I'm still looking at them like, is this one really is this really going to win Best Ball Mania? Is this really going to win the DraftKings Millie? And I find very, very few of them to be ones where I'm super duper excited about. But when you do find that one, it feels like, okay, this is what I did this is what I wasted all this time for, that I navigated all these injuries and I have 18 live players and some of them are pretty exciting or whatever. So it's this weird balancing act, I feel like, at this exact, point in time during the season.
It also might be why you don't lend yourself to drafting one specific type of build, right? Because if you went just mid QBs this year, for example, if you were like, I'm not even just saying the elite QBs because you know who I am. I'm all about the elite QBs. But if you tried to say, I'm going to take the middle of the road quarterbacks, the guys that are getting drafted in the 8th to the 10th round, that's going to be like my sweet spot for QBs. I'm not going to do the elite QBs. I'm not going to do the punt QBs, right? Your advance rate is probably decimated right now, unless you just locked into Tua and Dak Prescott. Then that's the only time that you're really looking great. And I don't think anyone was like, I have to draft these two guys. Russ as well. Russ is having a very okay season. But for the most part, you're losing Anthony Richardson. You're losing Kirk Cousins was a big one that got
Daniel
lost. His
Jones.
advance rate. Daniel Jones, right? Like Deshaun Watson, who wasn't having a great season, but was still in that range. So if you were very heavily drafting mid-round QBs, your teams are probably dusted, right? And maybe that's a lesson for me for other things because I went heavily elite QB. It's great this year. What happens if only 3 quarterbacks get hurt next year and it's Lamar, Hurts, and Mahomes? I would
Right.
I'd have to sell my dog probably. That's probably where I'd have to be right now. So I'm never going to be a guy that's going to be 8%, everything needs to be balanced type of guy. But I think what I'm learning this year is reining it in on certain situations. I think I got too in over my skis on J.K. Dobbins. As much as I loved him, as much as I thought he was a value, I got over my skis on it, right? I think the other thing that we can bring up, other than injuries, and we can hold this if you'd like, but we got to learn that even the smartest people in the room suck at player evaluation. They're just bad at it. People that I respect are bad at it. How many times this year have you heard that Kyren Williams is not a good football player? Right? Kyren Williams, he's not going to be a good football player. He's not this, he's not that, he's not the other thing. Same guys, same exact guys. And I'm not pointing you out, Eric, because you never were like this on Kyren. But it's the same guys that were like, Rashad Penny's a smash in the 12th round because of his player profile, because of the type of player he is. He's a smash. He's
funny you bring up 2 of my highest owned players who could you possibly get more like opposite ends of the one guy's not even active on game days and the other guy is like basically the biggest hit of the entire draft season. Really funny.
Just smashing, right? Like Kyren smashing. But people are still saying Kyren Williams not a good football player. Looks fucking good to me. Sorry for swearing. Looks pretty good to me.
Yeah, well, we do have to adjust. I feel like sorry to cut you off, but the whole like he's not a good football player. I do think the player evaluation thing requires like not a reset, but a little bit of a reset in that sometimes I think we do he's not a good football player and like judge it based on kind of flashiness a little bit, right? Like he's not a good football player because he doesn't play like Adrian Peterson, right? Or he doesn't hit home runs like Breece Hall does, or something like that. And look, I love Breece, and I do think Breece is very good, and I drafted a lot of Breece partially because I think he's good. But there's also like different varying types of good, right? Like Larry Fitzgerald was a very different kind of good compared to Jerry Rice, but they were both very good. And I'm not trying to say Kyren Williams is Larry Fitzgerald, but like stylistically, Kyren Williams is a very different kind of running back. I totally understand that, he does require volume, right? And he requires to be in a situation that can allow him to kind of get some of these goal line touchdowns, which of course he's going to get playing with Matthew Stafford. But like, that's also part of the point. You have to be a certain level of good to earn that role and never come off the field for Sean McVay, right? Like Cam Akers, some people thought was good, could never earn that role. Right, 2nd round pick, more highly drafted, more highly touted prospect. Darrell Henderson, he can't even stay on the team with the Rams. And so we'll talk more, of course, over the course of the offseason, kind of about the like player takes player evaluations and all that kind of stuff. But I think this year, one thing that was, to your point, Kyren, Tank Dell, Josh Downs, Tutu to a much, much, much lesser extent. But like some of these guys that were viewed as like, they're tweeners, or they're too small, or they're too slow, or they're not explosive enough. Like there are different kinds of good, and Kyren is still good. He just may not be good in the way that like you always want your running back to be good. Like, of course, if I had a dream, I would want all my running backs to look and run like Adrian Peterson and
Right.
catch like Christian McCaffrey. But like that, they don't have to be like that to be a really good fantasy asset. And we saw that with, I guess we can sort of use that as a segue into a Tank Dell, right? Tank Dell is very, very, very good, but he's 5'8", 170 pounds, right? And not that fast. He's fast, but not, he's not a, Tyquan Thornton ran a 4.2, right? Like he's not that fast. And so I think it's going to be important, when we get to the offseason to think through some of that player evaluation and what does it mean to be good, right? Because I think we have an idea once we've seen the production, whether it's good or not, but like, what does it mean to be, that unproven guy, and how do we assess whether he's good, right? Like I think some people thought Zamir White was good, and Zamir White might stink. And those people also might have thought Kyren Williams was bad, and Kyren Williams also is probably good. So like figuring all that out is super interesting.
Yeah, and we're not going to hit 100% on this every year. I mean, Uncle Andy brings up one of my big misses. Isaiah Pacheco was a smash at his ADP. He's crushing. I wasn't taking Pacheco. Literally, for the multiple reasons, this is a bad miss by me in particular. This is probably, I mean, I have misses, right? You bring up Tank Dell. I drafted some Tank Dell. I wasn't crazy overweight on him. Like, he wasn't someone that jumped out to me. But Isaiah Pacheco kind of checks a lot of the boxes for players that I was looking for, what I'm looking for in that range, and I miss it. And yeah, it's partially because he runs like an aardvark. Like, I don't know, like it's part that, but he's on an offense that we thought was going to be more explosive than they are. He was definitely going to be the lead running back for that particular team. Were we ever really worried about Jerick McKinnon or Clyde Edwards-Helaire? Not really, right? So why am I underweight on a player like that was getting drafted, 8th round, I want to say off the top of my head, somewhere in that wheelhouse? Why am I underweight on that guy? Because I wanted the Chiefs passing game. I had 23% Patrick Mahomes. That means 77% of my teams didn't have Patrick Mahomes. Why couldn't I put Pacheco on a couple of those teams? So gigantic miss by me. Gigantic miss.
What I will say about that as well, something that I find interesting that I actually thought a little bit about today from a strategic perspective, was something that I talked with Corain about on one of the episodes of Legendary Sickos over the course of the summer, where we were talking through, like, how do you get leverage in these best ball chips? Like, if you play DFS, but of course, if you, have listened to us, we talk about, right, leverage and uniqueness and ownership and all those kind of things, because we're trying to not only, draft the good players and advance teams, but once I get to that end goal, once I get to that week 17, how do I have a team that I'm not just like praying I have all the right players for that week, right? Which of course is generally what I'm doing, but how do I, when I'm drafting, manufacture potential leverage that I know I'll have some kind of leverage when I get to that week 17. It may not be the leverage that I want or need, but I can manufacture something during the draft that says, all right, if things go according to plan for this team, right? I draft like I'm right. I've manufactured one of Jamar Chase or T. Higgins are probably going to be low owned in this final. I don't know which one, but if I've gotten there, right, they both can't probably go completely nuclear in week 15 and 16, but both of them at the same time in both weeks, and they probably both can't go completely nuclear the whole season. So just the way I've set this team up, one of them has to be low, and maybe I even put Joe Mixon on that team, right? And it's like the pass game and Joe Mixon, they can't all be the nuts in week 15 and week 16, and maybe they can be okay over the course of the season, but I bring along Joe Mixon, right? And to your example, I'm going to go heavy on the Chiefs, and I'm going to go heavy on Patrick Mahomes. I'm going to bring along Isaiah Pacheco on some of these teams and say, okay, I got Brock Purdy as my QB2 with Patrick Mahomes. In week 16, Purdy is going to have a 30-point game or whatever, right? Purdy to Kittle is going to be the stack I need in week 16. And Mahomes actually maybe has a dud, but it's because Pacheco scored 3 touchdowns. Now I show up to the final and I got 2% owned Patrick Mahomes, right? Give me that 2% owned Patrick Mahomes and Rashee Rice. And I've manufactured myself a low owned Chiefs stack in week 17, just because I was like, what if this scenario plays out, right? We know it's good. I'm load up on the Chiefs. That sounds good. But I've manufactured this way for me to get leverage. So we're gonna spitball like tons of different ideas, of course, leading up to throughout the playoffs, and of course during the off season. But these are all things that I'm really at, like you said, as injuries have piled up, as guys have really started to break out. Of course, Pacheco is fresh on mind from last night. But like as all these things happen, I think it's important to think them through and figure out maybe where some misses are. But it's also important to just evaluate, like, was it a miss? How much of a miss was it? Was it variance? Was it? And like, we're in that part where I think we're all doing that, right? We're looking at lots of dead teams, or we're looking at mistakes we made in our portfolio and trying to figure out exactly where we might have went wrong.
And how many dead teams are going to get to the playoffs and just be dead right off the rip, right? Like there's going to be quite a few. I mean, it obviously contest specific, but I guarantee there's going to be teams that get through with, if they're lucky, one quarterback at this point, and there's going to be teams with no tight ends because the tight end position's kind of drying up a little bit as well, where some of the draft picks that you might have taken, we were drafting Greg Dulcich in whatever round, right?
Has he touched even the practice field this year? Like,
I mean, he got in one game, I think, but he's on teams. Irv Smith is on teams. You could have dragged some of these teams with another tight end. Like if you did it with Luke Musgrave and now he's out and you're getting to the thing, you get into the dance, right? Your team's dead. And the other thing I've learned this year is just trying to draft within the structure of the tournament more so than I have before. I'm learning. I'm not going to like get killed on drafters, but I think I really leaked on that site in particular. Shout out to drafters for the shirt, by the way. I don't think I played my best tournament strategy in any of their tournaments. I have some teams surging now. Maybe we get there, maybe we don't. Regardless of if I do or not, I don't think I played it well. Just straight up. I don't think I played drafters well. I think I played underdog relatively the way I wanted to. Things are breaking kind of the way I want to for those tournaments. I think to your point, my live teams that are going to be in the playoffs are going to be all the way live for the most part because of players that I drafted, with the exception of, I mean, Dobbins is like the one guy that I might drag to some of these teams. But I mean, I just feel like my underdog teams are relatively live. That doesn't mean they're all going to get through to week 17 or anything like that, but I feel like they're stronger than the field consensus of teams. Could mean nothing. And I think DraftKings, I was relatively strong there as well, but I really leaked in Superflex contests this year. I was real bad at those. I have one super team that I don't know how the hell I drafted this team. Looks really nice, but one team doesn't make up for the other 50 that you drafted that look like dog shit. Like you don't know what you're doing, right? So you can draft bad and still have outliers that are good, but there are certain contests that I just did not draft well. And if we're going to say any contest in particular that I drafted poorly, it's the weekly winners one. By far, I did not. And I knew it when I was drafting them is the problem, right? Like as I was drafting weekly winners, I'm like, I am not giving myself enough thought into this. So realizing what tournament you're in, some of them I did great in, like we said. The Mastiff, we just locked up basically our week advancing. We're getting our money back in that. And I think I played that one really smart. Like if you go back, you can watch all the drafts on that. I was getting yelled at by everyone in the comments about that team. That team has Debo. That team has Nico Collins. That team has Kyron Williams. That team has Trey McBride, George Kittle, right? The Brees Hall, like that. The running backs on this team are absolutely phenomenal, and some of those later wide receivers are hitting, like Nico Collins, like Rashee Rice, right? And that was all part of the strategy. And if I went to QBs on that particular team, remember, this is a structure that advances 6 out of 12 from the first round. So we're not playing best ball mania rules. So I drafted one quarterback, and that one quarterback literally allowed me to get Kyron Williams and Trey McBride. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had them if I drafted one of the other quarterbacks. Right? So understanding your contest is something that I'm learning heavily this year. I always know it. You always hear it. It's always drilled into your head. But looking through, to your point, some of these different contests, I'm like, here's what I did wrong on this specific group of players. And I'm going to be taking that into next year.
Yeah, see, I think what you just said is really some of the most important stuff and the things that actually are the most impactful when we reach this point and on into the off season, but also the things that people talk about the least. That tends to be the case in any kind of like peer-to-peer gambling venture. Everybody blames their player picks or variance as opposed to kind of assessing some of the actual nuanced parts of the process. But I think that we get, because the players and the binary results of individual players drive the outcomes of all of this, right? Over the course of the season, your player gets hurt or he doesn't. And they're all about the same, to varying degrees, they're all about the same probability to get hurt. And so it's a little bit of luck, of course, in terms of who gets hurt and how much you drafted of them. It is above and beyond that, binary results in terms of who has a good season and who doesn't. And some of that was a little bit easier to see coming and some of it was not. And then even further, right, you got to get through to the playoff weeks, and in particular in week 17. And you have to score points in one individual week, which is extreme levels of variance. And so I think people will do one of two things. They will throw it aside and say, oh, the Bills Bengals game got canceled and Mike Evans scored 4 touchdowns or whatever. And whatever, I don't know, it's just variance. And I do lean a little bit more to that direction, generally speaking, but I think you can play into it from a strategy perspective. But then on the flip side, people will do I should have known about this player, or I knew about this player, or I told you about this player, or everything is very, we saw the results. I should have known, or I did know. And that can be true at times, right? It feels really good when a player you drafted really heavily does well. And it feels really bad when a player you drafted really heavily does poorly or gets hurt. But I was actually talking to Corinne a little bit earlier, pretty much right before this show, where we actually brought up J.K. Dobbins. And both he and I said, I went actually, really, really heavy on J.K. Dobbins, and he went pretty heavy on J.K. Dobbins. But we were talking about kind of this exact process that we've brought up here. And he mentions how, despite the fact that J.K. Dobbins got hurt and was basically a zero, right? A shout out to him for like 11 fantasy points in week 1 before he went down. That's a real soldier, at least providing you a usable week before his career is over and your best ball season is over. But he's, even though he did nothing, he was a zero, right? And got hurt right away. He's like, I am kind of mad at myself for not drafting more of him. And it's, you see the Ravens season play out. You see Gus Edwards smash. You see Justice Hill had the week 1 smash. You see Keaton Mitchell, who is, good Lord, man. Like, that dude is shot out of a freaking cannon. And if they give him more touches, he's going to have some monster games, right? But all of this is to say, if J.K. Dobbins were healthy, all the idiots letting this dude fall to like the 8th round on DraftKings should be taken out to pasture, and you should be done with best ball, right? But we'll look back, and J.K. Dobbins was a zero. He looks in the results like a terrible pick, and it's like even Corinne was like, I wish I would have pressed that edge a little bit more in terms of I think J.K. Dobbins was one of the biggest edges in all of drafts, and I think actually the results, despite the fact that he has done nothing, have played out to show that he was one of the biggest edges in all of drafts. Now you can debate that, and that's fine. We're just using one specific example that is, of course, debatable.
And just to be clear, when I say I wish I drafted less of him, I was at 34%. I still would have liked to have had him at like 3x at like 24%. Right. I just think I went a little too much with it. Like, and it's not results oriented. It's looking back at some players that, and maybe Corinne's bringing up a point that maybe I did make the right play here, but continue.
But it's a good example, I think, of assessing not just the results and trying to set aside Well, like, dude, we get to this point, especially like we're going to get to week 17 and we're going to have very different, like once the results play out, right. We're going to have different conversations because you're either going to have a big payday or you're not, or you're not. And so the emotions will feel a little bit different and will be swayed based on what happened in week 17. But we reached this point where we're almost to the playoffs. We pretty much know, right? Like, about how many teams were going to advance. I'm praying. Who knew that the Commanders bye week was going to be so impactful for me in week 14, and it is. So I'm praying, to hold on to as many teams as I can while I've been counting on fricking Sam Howell to carry me. But going back and not just being like, that guy whiffed, I was wrong, or that guy hit and I was right. But going back and really like assessing the whole process of how you came to that decision, right? And so, like, for me, I have shitty advance rates pretty much everywhere. I think I'll do all right on drafters. I'm not going to like win the thing or have a super duper big score because I've fallen back a little bit. But like, I'll do fine on drafters. I'm going to be, I think, under expectation across the board on Underdog and on DraftKings from an advance rate perspective. And yet, and I've been over ever since this whole best ball game started. I've been way over expectation on advancing. I've made money. I've had some really good sweats. I've had some big hits on some individual players. And this year will be the worst advance rate and probably the worst, minimum cash that I bring back relative to the amount of money that I put in. And yet I actually think it's one of the better processes I put into play because I did what you said. I went into each tournament and I tried to play that tournament the way that I thought that tournament needed to be played. And I went in and I assessed the edges that I thought were there. And all those edges are totally debatable. So like I said, I'm not saying that I'm right, but I stuck to my part of why I have so much J.K. Dobbins is because I thought he was a good pick when he was going in like the 4th round, and the dude ends in like the 8th round. And I just kept buying. I kept buying the dip and buying the dip and buying the dip. So you go from 20%, like you said, to 45 or whatever. I took big stands on a lot of different guys, and I'm okay with that. And I'm okay finishing below expectation from an advance rate perspective because it's almost like it's a little bit of the tax you pay to find those teams when you're right about something. You don't have to be right about everything. Like you said, Rashad Penny, what a fucking L. I mean, my God, what an L, right? Damian Harris was an L regardless, but then he suffers a serious neck injury. Like, there's so many. Rashad Bateman is truly useless. Go to the CFL, please. Like, get out of my life.
There's still time, Eric. I'm still. That's the one I'm still.
He is crossed. Technically not dead, right? He is healthy, and Mark Andrews is out, so you can tell yourself a story about Rashad Bateman.
Only mostly dead.
Yeah, he is kind of dead. He's the Walking Dead. He is. These guys were huge whiffs, and I will of course continue to evaluate the process of like those individual players and how much of the stand I took and all that. But like, I go back and I'm like, would I make most of those bets again? Yeah. And part of it is because that mindset leads you to, again, using apparently Kareem is top of mind, but they talked, he had a dynasty, I think, round table with Kyle Dvorak and Daniel. I forget what Dan's last name is, but anyway, it was really, really good. And they talked about Adam Thielen, and they talked about how they whiffed on Adam Thielen, right? And now it's looking a little better now that we didn't draft any Adam Thielen because he turned back into a pumpkin. But like, they call it Adam Thielen is the tax you pay when you play the game like we play it. And that's a little bit how I feel. Like, J.K. Dobbins was an injury, but like Dame, Bateman, Penny were the tax I paid because of the way that I play it to get Kyron and to get Howell and to get to get these guys, right? To get Chuba and to get Jalen Warren and to get hopefully Tyjae Spears and to get Puka, to get those guys. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you have to pay a tax. You're not going to hit everything. We can't all be Felix from 2 years ago or whatever, where every player he drafted at 50% was literally the stone cold nuts. Sometimes you have to be able to like be comfortable being wrong, but knowing that there's like there's a light at the end of the tunnel. There's treasure at the end of the rainbow. And as of right now, like I'm continuing, like I said, to assess that process, but I feel okay. I don't feel perfect. I certainly don't think I did everything perfect. That is for sure. But I think the things that like you outlined that I feel the most uncomfortable about what I did are more so related to, should I play this tournament a little bit differently? Should I have constructed my rosters a little bit differently? Should I have, right, the combinations of players? Did I do that well enough? Right? Did I stack well enough? Should I have done more of the onslaughts that I talked about? Should I have done less? Should I have done more of the Tua double stacks? Because some of my best teams are Tyreek Waddle in the first 2 rounds with Tua. Should I have done more of those? Should I have done less? Right? That has nothing to do with the fact that Tyreek Hill is a monster smash. That has to do with the fact of all these the small micro levers that I'm trying to pull. And I think it's important to me personally, but I think if you're one of the sickos following us, watching us, hanging out with us in the Discord, that like, that's where we hang our hat, man. Like, honestly, I know the player stuff it's important, of course. And that's ultimately where the money is won. The players are the chess pieces, but like, it's a lot of variance, dude. It is with the individual players. And like I said, sometimes you can be right and be wrong. Last year, were you right or wrong about Breece Hall and Javonte Williams? I don't know. I think you were right if you drafted them, but you were wrong. J.K. Dobbins. I think I was right about J.K. Dobbins. But I was right. My bank account doesn't care. Yeah. Right? My bank account doesn't care that I was right about J.K. Dobbins. But like,
there's no Euro right points for these tournaments.
Yeah, I don't get to go to the bank and I say, look at all these Sklansky's. I got 45%. I got thousands of dollars to J.K. Dobbins. Would you accept a donation to my bank account? Obviously, no. But like, we're gonna be back doing this again in 4 months or 5 months, and like, we have to make sure that we're learning the right lessons. And so that's the thing that I've mostly been focused on right now, is like learning those right lessons.
And I think to go into this tax analogy that you brought up with Thielen, I think that's totally fine. I understand that point completely. I do think there's an outlying, and we were talking, me, you, and Hacker behind the scenes, trying to evaluate something for that we can possibly use next year to help with some of this stuff. And it's polling not levers just on teams, but the levers you pull on certain players and what their value to the team is, right?
Yes.
Where Thielen, yeah, we didn't like Thielen. I didn't like Thielen. I didn't draft Thielen. But let's look at a guy that like Adam Thielen and Tyler Boyd, right? I know it's not a 1-for-1 analogy, but I like to sort of call them like the comfort food of drafts, where when you're drafting a Tyler Boyd or Adam Thielen, it's comfort food because you know the name. It's comfortable because he's been there for you before, right? This is a comfortable player for you to draft. And you know what? Tank Dell is not a comfortable player for you to draft. Puka Nacua was not a comfortable. And if you say he is, you're full of shit, right?
No, like, he wasn't comfortable for fucking anybody, and I have my fair share. Yeah,
no, but that's why these guys get pushed up the board to these 12th round ADPs and stuff. But there is a difference between Adam Thielen and Tyler Boyd, where this is a very small one. And I'm not saying this should have got you overweight on Adam Thielen, but maybe this gets you to 3 or 4% Adam Thielen and helps your advance rates, right? For that stretch that he went on. The Panthers paid him money. They paid him some guaranteed money. They believed that he was going to be a player for them this year and next year at least, right? So this year in particular, maybe we should have been like, okay, he's too old. That's an X out. He's on the Carolina Panthers, another X out. And we start Xing out these levers, and we get to this one where we're like, but he has this guaranteed money. Maybe I still want to have him as one of my like 3 to 4% guys, or my 2 to 3% guys. Maybe I don't want to X him out completely. Whereas like Tyler Boyd, where are the levers that we want to pull on him, right? Like, and I like Tyler Boyd. I drafted more Tyler Boyd than I drafted Adam Thielen. That is for sure. I don't even have to look at the percentages. I know that's a fact,
yeah,
right? So it's a comfort food thing, but there's no discernible like the only good lever for him was that he was on the Bengals, which we thought was going to be a good team. We thought they were going to be an explosive offense, and that he might carry you a few weeks during the year. Like, he not even carry you, like he's not going to have an explosion game by any means, but he might have a usable week for you here and there. He
pops up for that 100-yard one touchdown game like every single year.
Yeah.
You can never predict it.
No.
Don't play him in DFS, but like you said, he pops up once or twice a year. I agree.
But he's a comfort food name. You know the name. Everyone knows Tyler Boyd.
Overpriced every year as well.
Every
To your example, or to your point that you made earlier, and like the comfort food thing is so true. He's on the Bengals. He's had some good games. He is Tyler Boyd. So you're paying a tax in the opposite direction of what I was talking. You're paying a premium on him because of all of those things. When I want to pay the premium on the name, right? Like I'll pay the premium on Jamar Chase, like until the day that he's like out of the league, because he's fucking Jamar Chase,
right.
not because he's on the Bengals and I can pipe dream about the 2 games a year that he does well.
Yeah, he's catching balls that are getting deflected by 15 guys and still coming down with it. That's the only way that Browning can get him the football, and yet he still does it. He still catches. He caught 2 of those last time. So the point being is, we have these comfort food players. We got to get off of them. Like I have to get off of them too. I'll never be 100% getting off of them. We're all going to fall into these little bit of traps. There's a couple guys that I didn't want to draft that I got scared about. I got scared about JSN because of how I couldn't stop hearing his name, right? Like all you heard was JSN. And in the beginning, I kind of dug my heels in. I'm like, this guy's going in this range of drafts. He's got DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett ahead of him on a team that does not like to throw the football if they do not have to. Geno Smith was fine for a bit last year. He's decent as a quarterback. I see a lot of red flags with this pick, and all I kept hearing was his skill. And so I got scared into drafting more JSN than I wanted to draft personally, because I'm like, I can't be the guy that misses out. I don't want to be the guy to plant my flag on not drafting JSN. Right. And I kind of should have, I mean, this is like an outlier, but like I should have listened to my gut on this one a little bit more. So
what I will say, I agree with you. I was just going to say on that point is also another good one, because we disagree on JSN. But what I will say, exactly what you were trying to outline, is something that I think that I did better this year. Not perfect, but better, is blocking out that other noise. Like I did believe in JSN. I respect what Rob has to say. I will listen to what Rob has to say, but is like, I'll take it in and I'll process it. And if it doesn't sway me, I'm not going to let, just because Rob said it and I respect Rob's opinion, doesn't mean I'm going to let it sway my actual drafts. Right. I mentioned Kerrane. It's really, Pat Kerrane's one of the people I listen to the most in like all of fantasy football. Him and I argued for hours on end over the summer about fucking Sam Howell. If I had listened to him, I would not be. I mean, I can only imagine what my teams would look like if I caved on Sam Howell, because my teams are so bad that he's one of the only good things that I have going for me. But to that end, it doesn't mean you don't listen to the other smart people, and it doesn't mean you don't take in the information and process it. But you had an opinion about this, and you, for no reason other than, I don't know, these other people do sometimes know what they're talking about, and I respect them. So, do I really want to go against it because they're making a decent case when you didn't believe it? You didn't believe it. And it's like, the whole point of who's right and who's wrong is nonsense. That's why what I was talking about earlier, throw that shit out the window. But the process of how you land on those picks, like, you should not have gone back on JSN if you didn't believe it. Now, if someone brings you the JSN case and you say, I hadn't thought about it that way, those are very good points, and I do think I should correct it. But if you do it just because you're like, yeah, a bunch of people keep talking about this guy and he's supposed to be really good, that's not a reason, right? That's I mean, it might be a reason if you are just playing this really casually and want to follow along with people, by all means, but not for you. That was not the right decision for you.
No,
and
it was wrong.
Every decision should be each person processing that decision, right? The people listening in this chat, we appreciate you hanging out with us and watching us, but I don't think you should take every word that I say, right, and say, yeah, Eric says JSN's really good, I'm gonna draft the shit out of JSN, right? No, you need to figure it out for yourself as well. And so, like, that's the stuff. Like, that's the stuff we have to figure out, is when do you take that thing in and say, okay, I do need to course correct a little bit because these points about JSN are really good. When do you take that in and you say, I respect you, I understand why you're drafting JSN, but I don't agree, and I'm not going to do it. And make sure you toe that line, you stay that course. And it's tough. It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard.
There was 2 guys for me this year that were like that in particular. It was JSN and it was Darren Waller. And I went 2 different ways with it. JSN, and I didn't go overweight JSN because I still had, and I'm kind of fine with the way I played it, where I just kind of hit that 8% or a little bit less of JSN, and I'm like, I'm kind of fine with that. In theory, maybe I should have leaned in a little more. I don't think I should have had 0, is what I will say right now. I don't think I should have had 0 JSN, but maybe 4%, right? Like maybe he should have been. He should have been a guy that I'm like, I'll sprinkle him in here and there. Darren Waller, I couldn't be sold
It's your Adam Thielen. It's your Adam Thielen. Sorry again, but it's the same thing as your Adam Thielen thing. You know, vastly different reasons why you land there. But you're saying, you know, maybe there was a valid reason to have it on certain teams to have Adam Thielen on that team. So you end up with 3% instead of 0%. The JSN can be the same thing. There are certain teams where you start a robust team and you take Mahomes on that, right? Or God forbid, you have Mahomes, Kelsey with running back starts. You need some juice at wide receiver.
Yep.
You need some late season upside at wide receiver. So like, okay, maybe JSN, I need to hit a home run. I don't need Deontay Johnson I don't need Deontay Johnson on the team. I need a home run. So JSN, figure out where that chess piece fits in, as opposed to, right. And God knows I fall into this. Like there's certain names, like you just don't see them. You just don't see the names. And so again, figuring out when they're the chess piece, the 3% chess piece, when they're the absolute stone cold never draft 0% guys, and when they're, you know, how you manipulate exactly how much you draft and on what teams you draft guys is like, again, that's the stuff. That's the stuff we need to figure out.
Yeah. And in between all this, in between the JSNs and the Adam Thielens and the Darren Wallers, I do think there's guys, especially in that range, that if we start talking about these levers, we can easily find reasons to be 0% on them, right? And being 0% on those particular guys, and you know, you're Tyler Boyd. I think Tyler Boyd is a great case to be 0% on Tyler Boyd. I don't think you needed to draft Tyler Boyd at all this year. Maybe it sounds like I'm being results oriented, but if you look back, I think the arguments for it are there to be like, I don't want Tyler Boyd. And I say this because we start talking about these other guys. We start talking about Tank Dell and Puka Nacua and Kyron Williams. And I'm going to say Keontae Ingram, right? Like, I know it hasn't worked out for him this year, but I think it's important to throw in some of the guys that it doesn't work out for, but could have. There was a case for Keontae Ingram at one point this season, right?
Well, so, yeah, Michael Carter's going to fucking smash on the Cardinals as the backup running back. Like, what has happened?
That point being, if you're Xing out some of these guys, it allows you to bring up some of these other ones, right? We talked about my Mastiff team. I have Kyron Williams and Trey McBride on it. How many people have that combination of players in general, because they were both 18-round picks? Who was bringing up Kyron Williams to the 17th round until the very end of the draft season, right? So even when they were, like, so many teams had already been drafted already, you could have been one of the guys that was like, I'm going to bring up Kyron Williams. That way I can take Trey McBride as my third tight end, right? Who was already going undrafted in general too. So like,
yep.
So these are the guys that we could have hammered on, right? Like, and brought them up. Tank Dell, Josh Downs, like these guys. I think Jaden Reed started going a little bit higher. Mingo's starting to hit a little bit. He started going up a little bit. Hyatt's starting to look like he has a little bit of juice going on too that we could have brought up. So like, and all of these guys are young and have outs to being the players. And we see it every year. We talk about it every year. We're not drafting some of these guys to smash in week 1. We're not. We're drafting them to smash post-bye or post-mid-season sometimes, depending on where their bye week is. And they start hitting. I mean, we brought Rashee Rice up. It was right? But what's the difference between Rashee Rice and, you know, Jalen Hyatt at the time? The offense that they're on, I guess, maybe but that's a 7-round difference between Rashee Rice and Jalen Hyatt at the particular time when we were drafting, not knowing what we knew. There was way more concerns with whatever the Chiefs offense was going to be. Kadarius Toney was going 6th round. We had Sky Moore going single digit rounds for a little bit. Like the Rashee Rice pass seemed like it was a lot harder to get up, but he got there. So if we're going to push,
doesn't that one feel so like you look back now and you're just like, oh yeah, that was a clean path for him to get there. But all summer it was just like, I don't know. And like people didn't love Rashee Rice as a prospect, and like he was fine,
Yeah.
right? But he was flawed. And it was just like, it's so funny to look back. He's such a good example of like, you see it now and you're just like, oh God, yeah, he needs to play more now still. Like I can't believe he needs to play like 90% of snaps and he's playing like 70. But it's like, we didn't even know if he'd get on the field. Like we legitimately did. Like Richie James hasn't done anything, but like I really liked Richie James because of all this that we're talking about here. And we look back and it looks, this is such a good example of, it looks like, oh yeah, Rashee Rice. What do you mean? Second round pick, Chiefs. His only competition was Tony and Sky Moore and MVS. Like, of course he's a smash. What do you mean? Of course. But like, you didn't know that in July. No. You didn't. Nobody did. And the Chiefs didn't know.
I did with how much I have, but
yeah.
No, I did not know.
But the Chiefs didn't know because why wasn't he playing so much earlier in the year if the Chiefs knew that he was the guy, right? You know.
Yeah, I mean, but we still had him high. He was still going higher than a lot of these other rookie wide receivers, and it's like, but why? And it's working out, but we could have been on Puka. We could have been on Downs. We could have been on Tank Dell, right? We didn't like the Texans offense in general. I didn't. I stand by some of the biases I had against the Texans offense. CJ Stroud's having the best rookie quarterback season of all time. Like, in my opinion, I don't think there's been a rookie quarterback season that's been better than CJ Stroud's. There's some that are okay, but he looks like a seasoned vet out there.
Yep.
Who the hell could have predicted that? In general, rookie quarterbacks suck. Look at Jordan Love, right? Jordan Love, this is his 15th season in the league. The first season he gets to start, right? And he looked like ass for 3/4 of the season so far. It looks like he's finally putting it together, but he's been around the NFL for years and years, and he still needed a learning curve here to start putting it together against it. And if he keeps it or not, we don't know. But Stroud looks like he's going to keep it. Stroud is just the real deal, man. Like, I'm willing to stamp that. I know I'm not being like crazy by saying that, or one of the only ones.
The rookie of the year has it locked up, and I think we all know. I am interested. Just a quick aside on Stroud. Without Tank, Tank's their best player other than Stroud.
Yeah,
I know Nico has been good and just popped off for freaking 200 yards yesterday, which was wild. But I there was a long conversation. Again, I don't want to rehash this one about Justin Herbert and exactly how good Justin Herbert is and the Chargers and all that kind of nonsense. But people are so quick to say, well, Justin Herbert hasn't had any weapons, right? They've all been hurt, which is malarkey. Keenan Allen's missed like 7 total games over Justin Herbert's whole career. I really don't want to hear about the lack of weapons. I know Mike Will's been hurt, but he's had Austin Eckler, right? He's had. Imagine what some of these teams would like. Mac Jones is like, what do you mean Justin Herbert doesn't have any weapons? Like, buddy, I'm throwing to Tyquan Thornton and Pop Douglas, and like I don't want to hear about lack of weapons, but it's getting thin for CJ Stroud, and Tank Dell was their best player. And like Tank Dell wasn't just good for, similar to how Stroud is not just good for a rookie. Stroud is just good for an NFL quarterback. Tank Dell was not just good for a rookie. Tank Dell was just good for an NFL wide receiver. He was like a really, really good wide receiver.
Legit.
So you remove that. Nico's good. Is Nico like carrying an NFL offense to the playoffs, even with good quarterback play? I don't know about that. I think he's good. Noah Brown, coming back should help. But I'm fascinated to see down the stretch here, because like people will make that case a lot about like, oh, when we throw a bone to the quarterback, it's like, oh, he didn't have any weapons, right? And sometimes that's true. Sometimes quarterbacks are missing weapons, and that is the problem. But also, like, Patrick Mahomes won a Super Bowl throwing to a bunch of corpses, and we're seeing that those guys are corpses. Now look at all of them. None of them are on the field for the Chiefs. The ones that are back are not playing, and the one that left can't get on the field for the fucking Patriots. So
speaking of which, see the 2006 Patriots as well.
Yeah, 100%. Exactly. And so anyway, long-winded way of saying I'm very, very interested to see what happens with Stroud down the stretch. And of course, Tank was I think Tank and Kyron were, for sure Tank because he was healthy all season up until this week. Just it doesn't get more home run from a fantasy pick really than Tank Dell and Kyron Williams. And it just sucks, man. It really, really sucks for everybody. If you did pack your bags, like trust me, I feel for you. We've all been there. It's really, really brutal. And for it to happen right before the fantasy playoffs is really like just a real swift kick to the groin. But it's not over. And if you have Texan stacks, the positive thing about hitting on someone like Tank or like Kyron or like Josh Downs or like Puka or whatever is they were very late picks. And so if you happen to construct a roster around them, they helped you probably carry that team to the playoffs. Now, if you can get somebody else to step up, if you have a Stroud, Nico, Tank team, right? Maybe Dalton Schultz is on there or something too. You're okay. Like it's not over. You're very annoyed and angry, but it's not over. And I was going through some of my teams this afternoon. I have almost none with the full roster on any site, on any tournament, on any site. And I drafted, I should have redid the math, but we approached 1,000 teams.
Yeah.
We approached 1,000 teams, and I have almost none with the full roster. So, like, if you're sitting there looking at your teams triggered and tilted because you go through it and there's dead spots everywhere, know that that's everyone. Everyone is dealing with that, and even the teams that you run into in the playoffs that do have full teams, like 3 duds from some of their guys, and you can beat them. This game's crazy. This game's absolutely crazy. I'll keep telling the story until the cows come home. The best ball team and the best ball sweat I've had in this entire journey was the team I drafted with Pete on Pete Overzet's one of his best ball streams 2 years ago, that we got 8th in the Best Ball Mania 2 finals. And similar to J.K. Dobbins, this is probably why I'm biased and holding out hope for my teams. It's because this is J.K. Dobbins all over again. But we drafted a 0 running back team. Raheem Mostert on the 49ers was our first running back, drafted, I believe, in the 8th round, 7th or 8th round. And he got hurt on the first drive of the season. So it's not over. We nearly won Best Ball. We were right there to win Best Ball Mania, and our first running back that we drafted, and we only drafted 6. So we only had 5 more. We had 5 more running backs to make it through the whole season. We played shorthanded and nearly won the whole thing. So it's not over, even though it feels really brutal, and it feels brutal for me. Like I was saying, I'm going through my teams, and it sucks. It sucks at this point in the season, but everybody's going through it, and all it takes is one. One team is going to make your whole season. Your whole season is defined by one team.
Yeah, and just for that example, I have J.K. Dobbins down on my Mastiff team, where the other running backs, though, are Pollard, Breece Hall, Roshan Johnson, Tyjae Spears, who might look good with the Derrick Henry stuff, and Kyron Williams. So we made it up, but we don't make it up if we don't have Kyron Williams there. Like that was that pick. I'll never forget that. No matter what this team does, understanding the structure of that Mastiff tournament, and I was talking to you about this too, like behind the scenes. I'm like, I think I'm going to do this. Like, what are your thoughts? And we had a discussion about it. I think we were both on the same page. For this structure,
slam dunk.
Just a slam dunk, right?
It was such a smart. It was one of the smarter things. I shouldn't even say this. I don't want it to be. I don't want it to be public that I'm saying Rob did one of the smartest things. But I think it was kind of the theme of the show. Is of course, players are important and everything. But shout out to my good friend Jordan Cooper, Blender HD from Roto Grinders in the DFS space. He also was big in poker, but he always says, for anybody that knows him, lineups, not players. And he also talks a lot about the specific contests. And in DFS, it's a lot small field versus large field. And in best ball, we have some of that, but in best ball, it has a lot more, of course, it has to do with small field versus large field, but also the advancement structure. And in particular, the Mastiff that you drafted was like the absolute perfect example to do exactly what you did. And yet most people would still never, ever, ever do it because it's so hard to just actually do once you get into that draft, right? And it's like, I'm putting $1,000 and I'm only drafting one quarterback. What if he gets hurt?
Yeah.
It's like, well, if Patrick Mahomes gets hurt, you're probably fucked anyway.
Just
You know,
about.
like it's probably over. But still, it's like, yeah, but I could advance. I could get my money right. That's the human psychology of all this. It's like, yeah, but if Mahomes gets hurt in like week 11, do I want to lose $1,000? You know, because I could still get my $1,000 back. And it's like, yeah, but like if he stays healthy, you're gonna get that $1,000 anyway. And now you got a real shot to win this thing. And your team in particular has a real shot to win this thing and got the $1,000 back because you know, this is the other part. It's a little bit right. You could have easily drafted Zamir White or whatever on that team, but that's the point. You gave yourself a shot to find Kyron. You gave yourself a shot to find the right picks. And the only thing you can do is give yourself a chance. That's the hard part of the human psychology is like, you got to push back on the fear of the risk and give yourself a chance to find the home run. And you did it in the right tournament and you played it perfectly. And that's like a shining example of how you should play this game.
But it also shows you, I mean, just go read the comments in that on those YouTube videos and you'll see the competition you're playing against. And I'm not trying to call anybody out in particular because I can't even remember who said what, but it shows you the level of thinking that goes into tournament selection and what you're doing in particular tournaments. I think we're all guilty of it to an extent here and there, where our brain goes to the $10 DraftKings, the Best Ball Mania, and we're like, this is the way I'm playing it. I need to draft because of this. And that was my weekly winners problem, I think, in general. So I think we all do it, but I think if you're going to play different types of tournaments, you really, really, really need to understand that structure of that particular tournament and understand the type of teams you should be drafting in them. And that's a big takeaway from, I mean, I've known it since, you know, the first year, since I drafted like 7 teams. After I drafted those 7 teams, there's a lot of things I did wrong. It was some of the first talking points that you and other people brought up is like understanding the structure of your team, and knowing your contest. But I think that every year you can find ways to help understand that even more, right? We have to be.
Yep.
Dude, if you're not learning more as you do something, stop doing it. If you can't learn anymore for the thing that you're doing, or you refuse to learn anymore, you need to stop doing it that moment because you are not giving yourself the opportunity to do better in it. Like, you're just not. So I think that that's going to be a big takeaway for me. There's a few other things, but that one in particular is going to be something, because I want to play all these different tournaments, right? I love the eliminator tournaments. What's the right way to draft for that? I had a fun team like for a while, but like what is a right structure for that? It's not drafting one quarterback because you're dead. So that's the inverse of that whole thing that we just talked about. So I just think that that's something I want to focus on a little bit more next year, and making sure I'm in the right mind frame to draft those particular teams from different formats.
Isn't it like a big part of it does have to do with, like, as sad as it is, like that mindset is like, it's so laborious. The summer is like, it's fun. We all love the drafting, but at the end of the day, you're like, it's a grind, dude. Like, it's you got to show up and draft several teams every single day for months and months and months with certain goals in mind. But like, balancing all these different goals can be very difficult to do. You know what I mean? And like, what do you think is like a lesson that you took away from like that, now that we're near the end, right? Is there anything that's popped out to you from like over the course of that whole summer? I fell into this trap. Like you talked about like the JSN thing, but I found myself like, just like you said, drafting the same players and same structures and stuff, like not because I didn't know better, but just because, like, I don't know, when I go to walk the dogs and I pop up a draft on my phone, it's like, I don't know, I'm distracted. And like, I don't know, you know, oh, I need another quarterback, take them. And it's like, did I think about the tournament that I'm in? Did I think about my portfolio? Did I think about my exposure? Did I think about the players that fit on this team? No, I didn't. I just clicked the buttons. Right. And like, I'm trying to think about how to be better about that, basically.
Yeah, and there's certain things that I'm hoping that me, you, and Hacker can work out behind the scenes to add to our Spike Week tools for when we're drafting that like just dawned on me over because this is what I mean, dude, we think about this shit nonstop. Like, believe it or not, we really do. So I was texting you and Hacker what a month ago, being like, here's some tools that I would like to see on the thing because I think it will elevate my game. And I think that there's no way I can ever draft 150 lineups at my computer. It's impossible. Like it's
Correct.
just never going to happen. And yet I still don't think I made a point enough to draft them at my computer this year, the amount that I should have been drafting. So using tools available to us, right? Seeing player percentages, seeing stacking options and all that stuff. Like we know it in our head, but actually seeing it sometimes helps you understand like that combo stuff. Imagine seeing that every single time, seeing that you have this player with your first round pick. Like it made me change who I took on certain drafts, while I was doing it on the computer. You saw it live on stream sometimes. Like I'm like, oh wait, I don't have this guy at all with this guy, even though I like drafting both of them. So you know what I mean? Like it's all about understanding how to play better. And I think for me, that is something I really want to strive to do next year is make sure that I'm using the tools available to me more. It doesn't mean I'm going to draft 100 teams with the tools, but a third. If we're being honest with ourselves, 50 over the course of 3 months, I can make that happen, right?
Yep.
So I don't know. What about you? Is there anything you're looking?
That's a very good one because like I said, I draft when I'm walking the dogs and cooking dinner and all that kind of stuff, and you can't like sit down at your workstation or whatever and do that. But definitely making a point because like you said, I think it's hard to describe, and folks that are watching and or listening that have the Draft Hacker can speak to exactly like what you said. You learn things while you're in the draft and make smart, informed decisions while you're in that draft that you wouldn't otherwise make, that make your teams better, that make your portfolio better, that you're just, like you said, sitting on your couch watching, the baseball game or cooking dinner or walking the dogs or whatever. You just wouldn't make that because your human brain can't process all that information that quickly, right? And
Yeah, imagine seeing that you have 16% George Kittle and 12% Jalen Hurts, but when you look and you're getting to that point, you're like, oh shit, I have 16% Kittle. I don't want to draft anymore. But then you see you don't have him with Jalen Hurts.
right.
Right.
Like, you learn so I feel like when I used, and shout out to Jonathan, says he can't draft without the hacker. You learn something in every single draft. I feel like, and this is coming from drafting 1,000 teams. So I went through 1,000 times, and every time I sat down and drafted with the hacker, I was like, wait, I don't have this guy with my second round pick because like my settings was a lot of the player combination stuff, like you mentioned. And for anybody that doesn't know, the Draft Hacker, there's a link in the description. But when you draft, right, you can set up the custom settings. There are so many settings now. I can't even so many customizable options to see on your screen while you're drafting. I can't even. We built it. I can't even keep track of how many are on there. But it is so powerful, and also you can have it help you how you want to be helped.
Right.
Like I wanted to be helped with all the player combination type stuff. I wanted to know who I have with my first round pick, who I have with my second round pick, right? Who I have with my quarterbacks, who I have with those kinds of things. Because I want to see exactly like what Rob said. I want to see when I get to the 7th round, am I subconsciously, without knowing, taking that same 7th round guy? I may like 4 7th rounders, but I take the same 7th round guy every time with my first round pick, right? All my Tyreek teams have whatever 7th round pick, right? And like there may be a reason that I may want that. Bateman or Dobbins, right? They play in week 17. maybe Dobbins is on my Tyreek teams, but do I want him on every team? But I just keep, because we talk a lot about the levers that you pull right during drafts. The correlation is one of those levers. So Dobbins is one of my favorite players. The Ravens are one of my favorite teams. I'm a little bit more of a 0 RB drafter, so he might be my first running back. And he correlates. I take lots of Tyreek. I take lots of Waddle. It's like, yeah, when you're walking the dogs, it's like you're thinking about those levers in real time, and you're like, oh yeah, Dobbins, dude. Easy. Don't have a running back yet. I got Tyreek. Boom, Dobbins. Easy game. When you sit down at your computer and you pull up the hacker and you're like, oh my God, 90% of my Tyreek teams
have
that
happened
because I'm doing that. I'm going through that process, going up that ladder. I'm like, okay, need a running back. Loved J.K. Dobbins is my highest ranked player, correlates with Tyreek. Boom, click every time. Just auto click every time. And then you sit down and you're like, okay, I love J.K. Dobbins. Every Tyreek team might be a little bit. I might be taking this a little bit, right. And maybe you want that, right? And that's totally fine. But that's up for you to decide. And there's no way to figure it out unless you're using that. And so obviously we're talking about the tools that we have built. So it feels like a little bit of a sales pitch, but honestly, it is, as a best ball player, build your own fucking tool for all I care. But do this. Like you should evaluate your teams in real time of all that kind of stuff. This is an awesome question / comment from Joey that says, do you feel the uncertainty of Josh Jacobs and Jonathan Taylor with their contract situation, Saquon to a much lesser extent, but Saquon to a lesser extent, made you draft different? And yes, for me, it absolutely did. Jonathan Taylor in particular. I didn't budge on Josh Jacobs, which is funny because maybe he was the one I should have budged on. I don't know. Although my best BBM team, literally highest scoring BBM team, has Josh Jacobs on it. Shout out to me.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, exactly. Nothing more triggering than going through, you're below average advance rate. All your players are dead or inactive on game days. Sam Howell's about to have a bye, so you're going to lose some more teams, and you're like, let's look at my good ones. Let's be glass half full for a few seconds and look at them. And the very first one you pull up has the second round pick you literally never wanted on any single team. But to Joey's point, it was Josh Jacobs. I'm curious how you feel about this question, because I think it's a really good one, and I think most people would be lying to themselves if they said that bizarre situation of really three kind of workhorse, slam dunk, whatever you want to call it, talented running backs that probably 4 years ago would have been first round picks, all of them in fantasy, were falling because of the contract uncertainty and the weird uncertainty during that running back time. And I didn't budge on Jacobs. I didn't really budge on Saquon either. I feel good about that one. But I did budge on Jonathan Taylor, and I started to take quite a bit of Jonathan Taylor. And I don't know. I haven't processed that. It's a great question because I haven't processed how I feel about it just yet. I think about a month ago, I would have said, I feel awesome for pivoting to take a bunch of JT. I don't know if that's actually how I feel, especially now, because he's out, but I don't have a great answer, but I will say it definitely made me draft differently for sure. That uncertainty was difficult to deal with. Yeah,
it was. So I would pivot this. I know it asks specifically about Jacobs and Taylor. I was out on Jacobs no matter what. He could have signed 15 years ago and had his contract going. I wasn't drafting Josh Jacobs in the second round this year. It just wasn't happening, or third round. I loved him in the 8th round the year before, but I was not taking Josh Jacobs at that price tag. The Taylor one is interesting, and I would pivot Jacobs' name to Cooper Kupp post the injury that he sustained.
Yeah.
And so the two that really altered my drafting was Taylor and Kupp. And I got scared of both heavily. The Kupp thing in particular really scared me. I thought it wasn't getting talked about enough. Going to see a specialist over a hamstring just never made sense to me. It could end up burying me. I think it ended up working out because he missed more games, but it doesn't mean the process was good. And that's the same for Taylor. There was so much uncertainty with Taylor, not just with the contract, we were talking about, I remember specifically talking about he couldn't even walk at practice like half the
Right.
time early in the year. So I'm like, dude, this guy can't walk. He doesn't have a contract. They're trying to trade him for Jalen Waddle, which is never going to happen.
Yeah.
Like, what is
He's
this
on
situation?
he's on the block. We would like one of the top 5 wide receivers in the NFL, please,
Yeah.
for Jonathan Taylor.
Yeah, I would say the one thing it changes for me is I was steadfast on there's no way he's going back to the Colts. This is not reconcilable. Like they're not going to see eye to eye. He's gone from the Colts at a minimum, right? And it just shows you that money just talks in the NFL, man. Like every situation is fixed with a little bit of this. So I'll never have that. I still don't know how I would have felt because of the injury. Look, I'm getting bailed out because of it. He went down again. I'm getting completely bailed out on this Jonathan Taylor thing. I take full acknowledgement of that. I got bailed out on Taylor. I probably got bailed out on Cooper Kupp quite a bit this year. I had more Kupp than Taylor, but I wasn't taking him during that dip. And I think the Kupp thing in particular was a mistake because of the teams you could have constructed with Kupp at that point in time. And the Taylor one, I think the situation was so outlandish that we're not going to see something overly similar to that again, that I feel fine with the fade overall, but it still was probably bad process wise. If that makes, I know that's like me middling it to a degree, but it's just such a weird situation with Taylor this year that when are we going to see that again? Realistically,
I think
with the injury too, and the contract
exactly.
thing.
This is another good one. And shout out to Joey for a good question. I'm definitely going to think a lot more about, but I think that it's one where, again, there's definitely no right or wrong. Like Cooper Kupp was falling to the second round in drafts. Jonathan Taylor was falling to the late third, fourth, whatever. And then of course he goes on IR right away afterwards to make you feel like you're having good process, and then he goes immediately on IR is a real another kick to the groin. Add it to the list of the never ending. This is Santa's list of all the kids, the kids' toys, same length as all of the kicks to the groin from the best ball gods this year. But I think you can make the case that says, look, this is Cooper Kupp. Using our projections and most projections that I know from a single game standpoint, projected as the number one, better than Justin Jefferson, better than Jamar Chase. Now, there were reasons he went after them, as we've now seen. But from the single funniest part, sorry, all these things pop into my mind as we start to talk through all this stuff, which is what makes this game so fun. But it's one of those where we talked earlier about how like last year Javonte and Breece, this year Dobbins. Like you were probably right, but you ended up wrong. Cooper Kupp, I heard tons of, well, Stafford's old and can't stay healthy, and so I can't take Kupp. You know, I can't take Kupp here. I got to take Kelsey over him or whatever, right? Or of course CMC or Tyreek. I got to take because Stafford can't stay healthy, and it's like, well, actually, I know Stafford missed a game, but like Stafford's been fine, and Stafford's balling the fuck out. By the way, for the Rams, he is as good as ever. It's Kupp that can't stay healthy. So you were actually wrong, but you got it right with the player. But if you just say this guy's been going in the top 5-ish all year, and he's plummeting because of this news, I'm gonna ignore all the signs and ignore all the maybe good logic about the injury and all that, and just say you're never going to be able to build a team like this with Cooper Kupp over the course of this tournament ever again.
Right.
And I'm just going to do it. I'm just going to take him with all these unique combinations, right? Like, obviously he hasn't hit, but imagine the CeeDee Lamb Cooper Kupp teams, right? Imagine the AJ Brown Cooper Kupp teams. Imagine Christian McCaffrey Cooper Kupp or whatever combination. If Cooper Kupp was just Cooper Kupp, we would all be like, oh my God, underdog at support at underdog, Throw those drafts out, please, because that's not. You gave them Christian McCaffrey and Cooper Kupp. That's not fair. They should have been the 1-2, right? But we would be thinking about that. Jonathan Taylor is a little bit similar. This is one of, if not the best running back in the entire NFL, plummeting because of this weird, crazy uncertainty. And like and I did do this. I just said, I'm just taking him, man. Like late third, like sometimes there was a handful of times early fourth. JT, I'm like, I get it. I get he's walking like a grandpa. I get all this other stuff, but I'm never going to be able to get this opportunity again, ever. Like maybe in best ball ever. So I'm just going to take it. Those ended up wrong, but that was the results. Were they wrong? I don't know. I don't know. I don't have the right answer, and I don't have the answer to whether it was right or wrong. But I think those are really fun kind of conversations. So shout out to Joey for asking it.
What I will say, and I won't take a lot of time saying it, is if it's just contract related, it's never going to stop me from signing a player. Like 9 out of 10 times, it's just going to be fine. I mean, who was the main guy that sat out this year? Chris Jones from the Chiefs, and he sat out one game.
One game,
right? I mean, come on.
And he's old.
Yeah,
and he's old. JT's young. You know, JT and Saquon are younger. Chris Jones like 30 or something, right?
That's why I still drafted Saquon here and there. I was still underweight because I didn't like the Giants at all this year. But if it's just contract, there's just no way that I'm gonna let that get in the way of drafting guy. And if it starts to get someone to fall, then yeah.
Really quickly before we wrap, just this comment from Olaf reminded me. We'll talk a little bit more about this tomorrow, because I want to talk about some guys we're looking forward to as the playoffs start to approach. But Olaf mentions Purdy was a steal all year. Definitely was. That is for certain. But I think that triumvirate. Stroud, Purdy, Howell is like one of those kind of like linchpins of the season. It's really funny, like you mentioned. Like I know Dak and Tua are awesome. It's this weird quarterback. Yeah. What a mindfuck quarterback is this year. Yeah. You have the elites doing the elite things, and then you have Dak and Tua in that middle 8th round, 9th round, or whatever, and then you have these dudes at the back. Purdy, Stroud, and Howell. And like, you don't want anybody else. Like, those are the only dudes you want, right? Even the healthy guys. Don't want Stafford. You don't want any of these other guys. You only want those guys. But is there anything that's just generally, we got a month left of the best ball season that you're just like, these are the things when I start to scroll through my teams, I'm like, please, give me that, or how much of, or like when I go to Draft IQ, right? Like I was searching Tajay. You mentioned, Derrick Henry has. I'm like, and I have a lot of Tajay, but I'm like, how many Tajay teams am I advancing, or how many teams are close, right? Like how many? We have in Draft IQ. For those that don't subscribe, you can see how many teams are within 20 points of advancing, and that's what I was like, oh my God, Derrick Henry's out. Like, because Tajay can be like that final boost, right? He can be that guy that helps set you over the edge. So he was one that really jumped out to me that I'm excited about. But was there anybody that jumped out to you?
I would say that the biggest thing I was looking for, this is going to kind of like alter your question a little bit. Dude, do you know how tough it was to have to root for the 49ers against the Eagles yesterday for me? But we had to root for it for best ball teams, because if the Eagles won yesterday, your Eagles players are dead week 17.
No, hold on. I'm cutting you off. We didn't have to root for it. Some of us are rooting for the only out we have to Rashad Penny being relevant this entire best ball season.
That's fair. That is fair.
The only way Rashad Penny was ever going to be relevant was that the Eagles just won out. So I was tilting Brock Purdy and Debo just carving up the Eagles.
Yeah. So I mean, like, that was the main thing I was looking at yesterday. I'm like, I hate watching this game because I grew up like as a Patriots and an Eagles fan. I got into football because of Randall Cunningham from the Eagles, and it hurt. And I'm not a fan like I used to be, but still, I don't want to actively root for my teams to lose unless it's for draft pick purposes. Shout out to the Patriots. And I had a root for the fucking 49ers to win yesterday, and that sucked. It sucked, but we did it. We got the 49ers win, and now all of our teams, that AFC is a mess. All your AFC players are alive throughout the playoffs.
Yeah. No worried about you. There's no worrying about rest for the AFC.
Yeah, and the NFC, as long as the 49ers keep winning games, the NFC is not a problem either for the most part. So we're going to have all our players active. It's looking like things change, pal.
I haven't looked at the schedule. The only like possible remaining thing to even think about is the situation we had last year with the Jags, where the Jags have nothing to play for in 17, but they have something to play for in 18.
That's a fair point.
I'm thinking mostly that division, actually, like Texans, Jags could have that something along those lines again. And NFC South is so bad. It's so bad. Do we have to just relegate some teams out of that? Like do we have to have an NFC South team? Because it's going to be the Falcons. The Falcons are going to make the playoffs, which is disgusting. Desmond Ridder should be contractually obligated to never start an NFL playoff game. But
at home.
Yeah, at home. He's literally going to play at home against the Cowboys in round 1. But they could have nothing in week 7 because they're only playing for the they're not going to win the wild card.
Yeah, so that's a good point. But for the most part, teams that I would normally be worried about that I was drafting heavily, like I wasn't drafting Atlanta. I mean, other than Drake.
Drake London. We're recording during Monday Night Football here. We're about to get out of here so everybody can go watch actual Monday Night Football instead of the pregame show. Monday night best ball. But shout out Shuby. Shout out to the Bengals. Actually, they said this week that they need to see what they have in Chase Brown. They basically know their season is over, and they need to see if Chase Brown is going to be a part of the future, because certainly Joe Mixon is not a part of the future. And I don't have the game on yet. And apparently Chase Brown is playing ahead of Joe Mixon. I have had now 3 people text me, is Joe Mixon not playing? Like, LOL. That's Mixon. Awesome. I have LOL Mixon. Is Mixon not playing? LOL Mixon is my messages. But so yeah, we'll maybe be talking a lot more about Chase Brown tomorrow. So join us tomorrow, same time, and afterwards tomorrow you can go watch some Hometown Ghost Stories with Rob and see some more ghosts other than just your best ball teams.
Best ball teams.
we will see you guys tomorrow.
Peace. Woo! Those were some spicy takes. Want to stay up to date with all of the other spicy takes we're going to have over here at Spike Week? Why don't you press that subscribe button below? You turn notifications on, we draft a team, boom, you know about it. We have another spicy take, boom, you know about it. You can be there. You can draft with us. You want to stay up to date? That's how you do it. All right, we'll catch you later next time here at Spike Week.